on introversion.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, so specifically, we're going to be looking at this YouTube video
Okay.
by Frank James, and it's called 10 Signs You're a True Introvert. Have you seen this one?
I have. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah.
It's a fun video, but it actually gets into some pretty surprisingly complex ideas about like how introverts' brains might actually work a little differently.
Yeah, like right off the bat, he talks about introverts feeling drained by social interaction very quickly. Not just like after a long day, but like even after like 75 minutes at a fun lunch with a friend.
Yeah.
Like I've totally been there.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know what's fascinating about that is that it might not just be a personal quirk.
Right.
Some researchers think that introverts' brains could actually process social stimulation differently.
Oh, wow.
Like, there's this whole theory about dopamine. You know that neurotransmitter that's associated with, like, reward and pleasure?
Right.
And how it might behave differently in introverts.
Interesting.
So, like, extroverts might get, like, a bigger dopamine rush from social interaction.
Okay.
While introverts kind of hit their peak sooner. And that might be why we get that, like, okay, I'm done feeling faster.
So it's like we're not being antisocial. It's just our brains are like, all right, we've had enough.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like a built-in limit almost.
Yeah. And that actually leads perfectly into like the next thing that Frank talks about is that introverts not only tolerate, but like actually enjoy being alone.
Right.
And sometimes even prefer it.
Exactly. And this is where we really have to distinguish introversion from shyness.
Right.
Because shy people might fear social situations, but introverts genuinely crave solitude. They find it restorative.
Yeah.
It's a chance to recharge process without that external input.
Right.
And it can even boost creativity, you know? Some research suggests that solitude can actually help introverts access like deeper levels of focus and insight.
That's pretty amazing.
It is, yeah.
I wonder if like our modern world, like this always connected world, makes it harder for introverts to thrive.
Absolutely. I think that's a valid point.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So the video also talks about how introverts often prefer one-on-one conversations to large groups.
Yeah.
And this is like me to a T.
Right.
Like I find it so hard to keep up with like multiple conversations happening at once.
It's like a classic sign. And it might tie back to that whole dopamine difference we were talking about.
Okay.
You know, because introverts tend to prefer depth over breadth when it comes to interaction. So they'd rather have like a truly engaging conversation with one person than try to juggle the scattered energy of a big group.
It's like trying to listen to 5 songs at once.
Exactly.
It just becomes noise.
Yeah, it's just overwhelming.
But wouldn't that make it harder for an introvert to like network effectively, like in a professional setting?
That's a great question.
You know?
And I think it highlights how important it is for introverts to understand their strengths and adapt their approach.
Right.
You know, networking doesn't have to be about working a crowded room.
Yeah.
Introverts can excel at connecting with people one-on-one, you know, building those deeper relationships that are often way more valuable in the long run.
Yeah. So it's about finding the strategies that play to their strengths.
Exactly.
So Frank also mentions introverts having a preference for working independently.
Yeah.
So could this also be linked to like how their brains function?
I think there's definitely a connection.
Yeah.
Introverts often excel at deep focused work.
Yeah.
That requires that sustained attention.
Right.
And they can get into that flow state way more easily when they're not constantly being pulled in different directions.
Right.
Think about some of history's greatest thinkers and innovators. A lot of them were known for their solitary work habits.
Yeah. Makes you wonder if this whole open office trend was really such a good idea.
You know, it's funny because that's actually a debate that's been going on for a while in the workplace design world.
I bet.
Yeah.
So, okay, so if introverts thrive in solitude and focused work, does that mean that they just don't like fun?
Well, Frank kind of jokes about that in the video.
He does, yeah.
But it does raise an interesting point about how introverts express enthusiasm.
Okay.
You know, they might not be the loudest or most demonstrative people in the room.
Right.
But that doesn't mean they're not enjoying themselves. It's just...
It's more internalized.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly.
And could that have something to do with the 5-factor model of personality you mentioned?
Yeah. Absolutely. So the 5-factor model
Yeah.
identifies extroversion as one of those core personality traits.
Okay.
And research suggests that extroverts might be more sensitive to those like immediate, intense, positive emotions.
Okay.
So they express them more outwardly.
Gotcha.
Whereas introverts experience joy and excitement
Yeah.
But maybe in a less externally visible way.
So it's not that the fun isn't there, it's just the volume knob is turned down a bit.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So this next point is one that I think a lot of introverts probably relate to.
Okay.
Is that they can be seen as hard to get to know because they don't readily share their thoughts and feelings.
Right. And it's important to remember with this one that introverts generally value quality over quantity in communication.
Okay.
They're not trying to be aloof.
Right.
They're just processing internally before sharing. Think of it this way.
Okay.
You know, an extrovert might share their life story after 10 minutes.
Right.
An introvert might need a little more time to feel comfortable opening up.
It's like they're curating their thoughts before sharing them.
Exactly.
Which makes them even more impactful when they do speak.
Yeah. And, you know, it's interesting because I've noticed that this tendency applies to decision-making, too.
Oh, totally.
Introverts seem to take their time weighing options carefully.
Absolutely.
Like really thinking things through.
Yeah, and it can be such a huge asset.
It can.
You know, they're less likely to make impulsive decisions.
Absolutely.
They're thinking about all the consequences and thinking about things from multiple angles.
Right. But of course, the downside is they can sometimes overthink things.
Totally.
And that leads to that analysis paralysis.
Yes.
So it's always about finding that balance.
Right. Harnessing the power of thoughtfulness, but not letting it debilitate you.
Exactly.
Okay. Frank gets pretty real when he talks about how introverts' nervous systems are wired differently. Making them more sensitive to external stimuli.
Yeah.
Have you found that to be true in your research?
You know, there's actually a growing body of research on sensory processing sensitivity.
Okay.
And it does suggest that introverts might indeed process sensory information more deeply. Interesting.
This can make them more aware of subtle details in their environment.
Okay.
But it can also lead to feeling overwhelmed in situations with a lot of noise.
Right.
Bright lights. Yeah. Social demands.
That explains why I need a break after I go to the mall.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like a sensory overload.
Oh my gosh, yes.
But for introverts, it can be amplified.
Absolutely.
And this sensitivity might also tie into Frank's next point.
Okay.
Which is the idea that introverts might not be naturally assertive.
Do you think that's true?
Well, it's a common misconception.
Okay.
It's not that introverts lack the capacity for assertiveness.
Okay.
It's that their sensitivity to conflict combined with a preference for avoiding the spotlight can make it feel more challenging.
So it's more about needing to develop that skill.
Exactly.
You know, learning to set boundaries and advocate for their needs in a way that feels authentic.
Yes.
This has been so insightful.
It's a fascinating topic.
It really is. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface, though. Oh, yeah. There's so much more to uncover.
There is.
Yeah, it really is a deep dive, isn't it? There's so much to unpack about introversion.
Yeah, and speaking of uncovering, Frank's next point was that introverts could be seen as antisocial.
Right.
But he clarifies that it's not that they dislike people. It's just that they need that recharge time.
Exactly. It's a really crucial distinction.
Yeah.
Introversion is not a social disorder. It's a different way of relating to the world.
Right.
Many introverts have rich social lives.
Yeah.
Just on their own terms, you know?
So it's not about quantity. It's about quality.
Exactly.
But that makes me wonder, with this preference for, like, deeper connection and this thoughtful processing.
Yeah.
Could introverts actually be better leaders in some ways?
That is a fascinating question, and there's actually some evidence to suggest that might be true.
Really?
Yeah. Think about some of history's most influential figures, you know, scientists, writers, even political leaders.
Right.
Many of them were known for their introverted tendencies. They lead by example, you know, through careful thought and strategic action.
So instead of that, like, loud, charismatic leader,
right,
you have this more, like, thoughtful and deliberate approach.
Exactly. And it can be just as effective, if not more so in some cases.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
It is.
But wouldn't their preference for working independently be a challenge in a leadership role?
Yeah.
Where you have to collaborate?
That's a good point. And I think it's about finding balance.
Okay.
You know, introverted leaders can excel at creating environments
where
both individual contributions and team collaboration are valued.
Right.
They're often really good at listening to diverse perspectives, carefully weighing options and making strategic decisions.
Right.
Plus, they tend to be very empathetic.
Yeah.
Which can really help foster strong team dynamics.
It's like they bring this calming, focused energy to leadership, which is so different from that, like, always-on style that we see.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a different kind of presence that they bring.
So back to Frank's video, he talks about introverts sometimes being seen as pessimistic or skeptical.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any truth to that?
I think it's less about pessimism and more about a cautious, analytical approach to life.
Okay.
Introverts tend to think things through thoroughly,
right.
Assess potential downsides, risks.
Like they're playing devil's advocate in their own mind.
Exactly. Yeah. They're always looking for those potential pitfalls.
But wouldn't that also mean they miss out on opportunities?
It could, yeah.
Because they're too busy overthinking?
That's definitely the potential downside.
Right.
And it's something that a lot of introverts work on.
Right.
Finding that balance between careful consideration and actually taking action.
Right. But you can't deny the value of that thoughtful, measured perspective.
Oh, absolutely.
They're often the ones who spot the details that other people miss.
Exactly.
Like prevent problems.
Right. It's like having a built-in risk assessment team.
Totally.
In your head.
Okay, so Frank also mentions that introverts might have a harder time being assertive.
Yeah.
Is that something that they're just born with?
Well, I think assertiveness is definitely a skill that can be learned and developed. Yeah. It's just that for introverts, it might require more conscious effort.
Okay.
Remember, they're often sensitive to conflict.
Yeah.
And prefer to avoid the spotlight. So
yeah.
Learning to express their needs and set boundaries can be a process.
So it's almost like they have to overcome a double hurdle.
Right.
Their natural inclination plus the pressure to be extroverted.
Yeah, exactly. It's like society is telling them to be one way.
Totally.
While their nature is kind of pulling them in another.
Yeah, which actually makes me think about it. Frank kind of jokes in the video that introverts don't like fun.
He does, yeah.
But is there any truth to that?
I think it's definitely a stereotype.
Okay.
Introverts experience joy and find things fun.
Yeah.
But their expression of it might be different.
Okay.
They might not be as outwardly enthusiastic.
Right.
Or seek out that constant stimulation.
Okay.
Their fun might involve, a quiet evening with a good book.
Yeah.
A deep conversation with a close friend.
Right.
Pursuing a creative passion.
It's not that they don't like fun. It's that their definition of fun is different.
Exactly. Yeah, they're tuning into a different frequency.
Yeah, like that.
Of enjoyment.
Okay, so let's get back to one of Frank's points that really resonated with me.
Okay.
This idea that introverts thrive in one-on-one conversations, but find large groups draining.
Yeah.
What's the science behind that?
Well, I think it goes back to how introverts process information and social energy. They prefer depth over breadth, focused attention over scattered stimulation.
Right.
So in a one-on-one conversation, they can really tune into the other person, engage deeply with the topic, and build that meaningful connection.
Whereas in a large group, their attention is being pulled in a million directions.
Exactly. It's like sensory overload, but on a social level.
Yeah.
Their brains are working overtime trying to process all that input.
Right. So it's not that they can't handle social situations. It's that they need to be more strategic about it.
Exactly. It's about energy management.
Okay, so what are some strategies that introverts can use to navigate those group situations?
That's a good question.
Yeah, because let's face it, sometimes you can't avoid a party or a big work meeting.
That's true. And I think one strategy is to prepare in advance.
Okay.
If you know you're going to be in a large group, take some time for solitude beforehand.
So prime the pump?
Exactly. Yeah. Recharge those batteries.
Okay. So what about during the event itself?
Well, one trick is to find a quiet corner to retreat to.
Okay.
When you need a break.
Yeah.
Even just a few minutes of solitude can help you reset.
Gotcha.
You can also focus on engaging in one-on-one conversations within the larger group.
Okay.
Find those people that you connect with and have those more meaningful interactions.
It's about choosing your battles.
Exactly. Focus your social energy where it matters most.
I like that. And don't be afraid to excuse yourself when you need to.
Right.
It's okay to say, I'm going to step out for a bit, or I need to recharge.
Exactly. People who understand introversion will totally respect that.
Yeah. It's about setting those boundaries and prioritizing your well-being, which can be tough.
It can be.
Because there's all this pressure to conform to these social expectations.
Absolutely.
But as we've been discussing, introversion is not a weakness.
Right.
It's just a different way of being in the world.
It comes with its own strengths and challenges.
Exactly. And one of the strengths that Frank highlights in his video is this tendency to be very thoughtful and deliberate in decision-making.
Absolutely.
Weighing all the options, thinking about all the consequences, which can be so valuable.
It can.
Especially in situations where a hasty decision could have big repercussions.
Right.
But then, of course, there's the flip side, that overthinking.
Yeah.
getting stuck in that analysis paralysis.
The classic introvert dilemma.
Totally.
It all comes back to finding that balance.
Right.
Learning to trust your gut setting deadlines for decision-making.
Yeah.
And seeking feedback from trusted sources.
So it's about harnessing the power of that thoughtfulness without letting it become debilitating.
Exactly.
And another point that Frank touches on in his video, and this is a big one, is this idea that introverts' nervous systems are wired differently.
Yeah.
Making them more sensitive to external stimuli.
It's true.
We talked about this earlier.
Yeah.
And it really resonated with me. Like, I know I can only handle so much before I need a break.
Right.
But what's the science behind it?
Well, the concept of sensory process sensitivity is gaining a lot more attention in the scientific community these days.
Okay.
And research suggests that introverts might have a lower threshold for sensory input.
Okay.
Like their brains might process sensory information more deeply, which can make them more aware of subtle details.
Right.
But also more susceptible to overwhelm.
So it's like they're experiencing the world in high definition.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Taking in all the nuances. But it comes at a cost.
It does.
It's like having a super sensitive microphone.
Exactly. It picks up every little sound.
Yeah. And that explains why introverts might need more downtime.
Right.
More quiet spaces.
Yeah.
More opportunities to just retreat from all that sensory overload.
Absolutely. It's essential for their well-being.
It makes you wonder if our modern world, with all the stimulation and demands for our attention, is making it harder for introverts to thrive.
Yeah. It's a valid concern, and it highlights how important it is for introverts to really understand their needs, advocate for themselves, create those pockets of quiet and solitude.
And for those who don't quite fit the classic introvert mold.
That's a great point, because we've been talking about introversion kind of in these general terms.
Right.
But it's important to remember that it exists on a spectrum.
So not all introverts are created equal.
Exactly. Some might be very strongly introverted, while others are more what we call ambiverted.
Okay.
Falling somewhere in between introversion and extroversion.
Right.
And even within those categories, there's a huge range of individual variation.
So it's about figuring out your own unique needs and preferences.
Exactly. It's not about fitting into a box.
Right.
It's about embracing your individuality.
And that brings us to another important aspect of introversion that Frank mentions.
Oh, yeah.
This idea that introverts can be harder to get to know because they don't readily share all their thoughts and feelings.
Right, and it goes back to what we were talking about earlier about introverts valuing quality over quantity in communication.
Right.
They're not trying to be aloof.
Right.
They're just processing internally before sharing.
It's like they're carefully curating their thoughts.
Exactly.
Choosing their words deliberately. And then when they speak, it's really impactful.
It is, and it's important for others to understand this about introverts.
Yeah.
Don't mistake their quietness for disinterest.
Right.
Or aloofness.
Give them the space to process and share on their own terms.
Exactly.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation.
It really is a fascinating topic.
We've covered so much ground, from brain chemistry to leadership styles to social strategies.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm seeing introversion in a whole new light.
I'm glad to hear that. And we're not done yet.
Oh.
There's still so much to explore.
Okay.
Especially when it comes to how understanding introversion can impact our relationships, our workplaces, and even society as a whole.
I'm eager to hear more.
Let's dive into those bigger picture implications in our final part.
So we've talked about a lot of the traits of introverts and how they're different.
Right.
But I'm curious about the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Like, what does understanding introversion mean for society as a whole?
That's a great question.
You know?
It makes you wonder if we've been doing things a little backward, prioritizing those extroverted traits without really fully appreciating the strengths that introverts bring.
Yeah, because a lot of our systems from school classrooms designed for group work to workplaces that value constant collaboration, it all seems geared towards extroverts.
Yeah, it does.
So is that creating like an unfair disadvantage for introverts?
I think it's definitely something to consider.
Yeah.
When we prioritize outward expression and like quick thinking on your feet,
right,
and a high tolerance for constant stimulation,
right,
we might be inadvertently overlooking those deep thinkers, the careful planners, the ones who really thrive in quieter environments.
Yeah, it's like we're missing out on a whole dimension of talent and insight.
Absolutely.
Because we're not creating spaces where introverts can really shine.
Exactly.
And what about in relationships?
Yeah.
We've talked about how introverts need more solitude. But doesn't that kind of clash with the whole idea of like spending quality time with a partner?
Well, it's not about avoiding connection. It's about understanding different needs.
Okay.
Just like introverts recharge in solitude.
Right.
Extroverts recharge through social interaction.
Yeah.
So in a relationship, it's about finding that balance.
Right.
Honoring each other's needs for both connection and space.
So instead of seeing it as a conflict, it's like recognizing that those differences actually complement each other.
Exactly.
The introvert might help the extrovert slow down and reflect, while the extrovert might encourage the introvert to, step outside their comfort zone.
It's about using those differences to create a stronger, more dynamic relationship.
And this applies to, like, friendships, family dynamics.
Absolutely.
Even work collaborations.
Yeah. Anywhere where you have people interacting.
Yeah. This makes me think about something we were discussing earlier about introverts as leaders.
Okay.
We often associate leadership with, like, charisma and being the center of attention.
Right.
But maybe that's a very limited view.
It might be.
And
what's so fascinating is that a lot of the qualities that we associate with introversion, like deep thinking, careful planning, empathetic listening, those are all incredibly valuable in leadership roles.
It's almost like we need a new definition of leadership that recognizes that, like, quiet strength, the ability to inspire through thoughtful action.
Absolutely.
Rather than constant pronouncement.
By example.
Yeah. And imagine the impact that could have on workplaces.
Yeah.
What if we designed work environments that catered to different work styles?
Right.
Recognizing that some people thrive in those collaborative settings, but others do their best work independently.
It's about creating a more diverse and inclusive work culture.
Right.
Where everyone's strengths are recognized and utilized.
I bet that would lead to some amazing innovation.
I think so, too.
I know.
It's exciting to think about the possibilities.
It really is. And it all starts with awareness.
Yeah.
The more we talk about introversion, the more we understand it. The more we can create a world that values all types of minds.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Frank's video is a great starting point.
It is.
It uses humor to introduce some pretty complex ideas.
Yeah.
And it really gets people thinking about, how these traits show up in their own lives and the people around them.
Exactly. It's a reminder that introversion isn't about being shy or antisocial.
Right.
It's just a different way of experiencing the world.
And those differences, when understood and appreciated,
can
really enrich our lives.
It can.
In so many ways.
Absolutely.
So to our listener, whether you identify as an introvert or you're just curious about this personality type, we hope this deep dive has given you some new insights.
I hope so.
And remember, this is just the beginning of the exploration.
Right. There's so much more to learn.
There's tons of information out there, books, articles, podcasts, all dedicated to helping people understand and embrace introversion. And don't forget to check out Frank James' video, 10 Signs You're a True Introvert.
Yes. It's a great watch.
It's fun. It's engaging.
Yeah.
And it's a good way to learn more about yourself and the introverts in your life.
And most importantly, keep those conversations going.
Yes.
The more we talk about these things, the more we create a world where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued for who they are.
That's a perfect note to end on.
It is.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into introversion.
My pleasure.
We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration of the human experience.